What is good garbage to me? Garbage that was headed to the landfill but got diverted into something much better, which is compost.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage Podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question: what is good garbage? Life and business are also interconnected. Our choices and actions impact way beyond our imagination. It is difficult for compostable packaging solutions to have success without there being demand for compost. And that then connects to the wider issues of land use and how we grow our food. Susan Thoman, the founder of Compost Manufacturing Alliance, is working hard towards joining the dots and enabling more composting to happen. We get to speak about the challenges that composters face and how we will need all different components to come together to find solutions. Listen and learn. And I would like to add a big thank you to Susan because she was very under the weather the day we recorded. So you do hear sometimes that her throat is not totally well, but we had a great recording. Hello, hello. We have Susan Thoman today in the house, and she's the principal and managing director of Compostable Manufacturing Alliance. Apart from that, you wear a lot of hats, Susan. So I'm so excited to have you on the show. Thank you for taking the time and talking to us.
Well, thank you, Vet. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Superb. You're clearly an eco warrior for a long, long time. So I want to start with growing up and what were the influences in your life that made you the person you are today?
Wow, that is an excellent question, and I'm so glad you asked it. I actually grew up in a large family, and my mother was probably the best example of Earth's best steward. She taught us. We grew our own food. Every year we had a huge organic garden, and that was I'm not a young woman, so many years ago, she was an organic gardener before it was all the craze. So, we never used chemicals. We used natural things like bone meal and manure and things like that, and compost. We made our own compost, and so I feel like I was raised with a real ethic for the environment and not being wasteful. And before single use packaging really hit our culture, we didn't really have a lot of that when I was a young girl many years ago. We had a reusable lunch pail, and we brought a thermos, and that was my generation's water bottle when we were kids, but it was all reusable. So just having that, grounding in don't be wasteful, and then moving into career later on in life, there's just some parallels that I think asking that question makes that a real special question, because I think that really has affected some of the choices I've made in my vocation. So, but no, I feel like I grew up with a really big, wonderful family that were really good stewards of the earth, and we knew about composting and growing our food, and we knew how to grow food, which a lot of people don't even know how to do that these days. And I think a lot of that influenced my desire to take the path that I did in my career.
And as it turns out, I'm sitting on an organic permaculture farm in India as I talk to you right now.
Very good. That's good to know. My mother would be so pleased if she were here.
This is where my wife and I spent a lot of time before I moved to US, and I'm back here with my family. Normally we do that in this month, and it's always such a joy, right? Because
Yeah.
it's so interesting that what you mentioned, and what was coming to me was because I we converted this from an orchard which was using chemicals to permaculture and no chemicals. And what the beautiful thing, Susan, there was the amount of migratory birds that started coming.
Oh,
And it
yes,
was just
wonderful.
stunning to watch that change in 5 or 6 years, and how nature kind of has its own indications, and they would all come there.
You improve the ecosystem and it attracts all this wonderful life.
Yeah. And what part of the country did you grow up in?
Various places. We moved around a lot, but the formidable years, mostly Midwest, Iowa. We actually had a farm. We didn't live on it, but we had a farm away from our house that we would work with another family on the weekend. So we grew food, like I said, and Missouri. So Iowa and Missouri. And then, my dad was in the service. So we traveled to other states when I was younger, but most of our time was there. And then I moved out to Washington State, where I live now and have lived for many, many years as I guess a teenager, and have lived here my whole adult life. So we're pretty much in Seattle most of my adult life, but in the Midwest as a kid.
Yeah, that's definitely a farming area. So why journalism and communications?
I love words. I love to write. I've always been an avid writer, a very prolific writer ever since I was a child, and it was just a joy of mine to write. It just felt a bit like a very natural part of me. And for some people, I know that they struggle with writing, but writing was always sort of cathartic in a lot of ways, and it also, I just love words. And I think, even in the field I'm in now, it's pretty high competency in operations and permits and things like that. So having other skills that balance that out, like communication and journalism, I think it allows us to, me and some of the folks I get to work with, to be educators too. So, but I just love words, and I love to be able to take words and hopefully have people understand them, as a teaching, opportunity and a way to share knowledge and wisdom when you sort of mine a path or a niche in your career that people are interested in.
Yeah, interestingly, my wife is also a master's in communication, and she is a masterful communicator. So
There
I
you
I
go.
understand that, and it really helps, in different fields, like you said. But then you take this degree, and you get into mostly what I saw from your career is mostly sales and in recycling. How did that How did that happen? Was that by design or by choice?
Well, it was through evolution. I used to be a printer. When I was a very young woman in college, I ran print shops, and the owner asked me to go out and be a salesperson to sell printing for the big jobs. So I would go out in the 80s in my little suit and sell print jobs. And I ended up selling printing to a company that did environmental equipment. And I guess they liked me and asked me to come sell for them. And I went, okay. And I was a very young woman, and I went to work for an environmental equipment company. And we sold a lot of oil spill equipment, of all things. They were based in Alaska. And over that time period, I was able to go to the big spill in the Exxon Valdez spill up in Alaska and be part of the cleanup efforts there. And that was a huge life experience for me as a young woman. And I learned a lot about how things work and how they don't work sometimes. And it gave me a real appreciation, though, for our environment, how, fragile it is when, we have situations like oil spills and things like that, how fragile it is in our ecosystem when those pollutants can get into waterways. So it was a great education in learning how to be part of the solution, but also understanding the fragility of our environment and why that field is so interesting to me.
And when you say oil spill equipment, it's the equipment that cleans up oil spills?
There's sorbent materials that are like, pads and booms to surround it. You have to contain well first, so there's booms. And then there's skimmers that ride along the water and pull the oil out, and so it gets pumped onto shore in the barrel so you can get it off the water. And yeah, and there's skimmers that have hydrophilic, oleophilic, materials in it that soak in the oil but repel the water. There's all kinds of innovations to clean oil spills out there. And so I got to learn about those, got to learn how to find it all over the world because oil spills are not really common. So if you have a really big spill, you have to get all the equipment you can find all over the world for that. And that was also quite the experience to learn about, trying to get materials from another part of the world and ship it and get a military truck to take it to the spill. And that was a lot of action for a young woman to be part of. And I learned a lot. It was an interesting way to start my career. So
Yeah, and these must be huge if you're trying to clean up oil spills in the middle of the ocean. I'm sure it's not easy to
Yeah,
kind of
there's
move
oil.
those equipments as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of logistics. You're right about that. There's a lot of logistics. How do you get it there? Do you have to barge it there? Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot to it.
And then you make a switch from recycling to composting with Cedar
And
Grove coming into your life. And that may sound like a minor switch, but it's not, right? You and I both know it's like a huge difference between composting and recycling.
yeah, I think oil got me into chemical waste management, which was like solvent recycling and taking high tech waste and repurposing it for like the automotive industry. And then that led to the Bancheros, who owned the company, the composting company I worked for, owned that company. And that's how I got into composting. So that was the leap from chemicals and really fluid chemical recycling. And then I worked for a time with cement plant alternative materials and fuels programs for about a year or two. I did that. But it was always like, how do you take something that's a waste and make it purposeful, or use it as an input to another industry that maybe doesn't need the level of purity, and you can reuse that material. And then if you think about it, when you said, oh, recycling's different from composting, well, it's still reusing things. So then you move to composting and you're taking grass and leaves and things like that that we're fortunate at where I live, where they actually go to composting all over our state, and it's mandated. It can't go anywhere else. So, we're fortunate to have that program and that infrastructure here, but it's still taking what would have been a waste, creating methane in a landfill and bringing it back to your house so you can grow your vegetables in it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I want to dig a lot deeper into Cedar Grove because that seems to be a fascinating company. And of course, eventually it transitions into CMA and you kind of initiating that. But we'll get there. We'll get to the CMA bit. But I really want to understand more about Cedar Grove and how it came about. And, you know, one is, of course, your career with Cedar Grove, but the company itself, because it seems to be a very purpose led kind of
Oh,
organization.
yeah.
So, how do you see that? Talk to us a little more
Yeah,
about
and I
the
don't
company.
work for Cedar Grove now.
I know, I know.
And so what I will just tell you is just generally what I know from my years there and my extremely, you know, my gratitude for working for them, the Banchero family in Cedar Grove, but wonderful people. But yes, they started a lot of the recycling businesses, generations ago in Seattle. So they were a big part with some other families in Seattle in building really the infrastructure for Seattle's recycling systems. And that eventually led to the company I ended up working for, the Bancheros. They did tank cleaning and they did oil recycling and they did all these wonderful things. And they did a lot of contracts for the military for waste managing, chemical waste and things like that. And they grew into all these really great company, services, and they just really invested in them. And it was always about minimizing what we take to the landfill. And so really, I think they've always been about, make whatever you can from a material. And they were great mentors, what might be a waste material and turn it into something valuable. And I can just, knowing their history and knowing my time there and knowing what they do today, where they take compost and they grow vegetables now and they bring the vegetables to the stadiums and they make French fries out of them. I mean, they are one of the most brilliant families or businesses for vertical marketing to solve environmental issues, and they're just amazing that way. And I feel very, very grateful that I got the years I had with them to learn from them and grow with them, and really appreciate, the investments they've made in the success of the programs in the Seattle area and the whole state of Washington. They're pretty amazing people.
Yeah, and yeah, it's powerful to see how a company can do so much good along with building a business. So yeah, that takes us well to positions as well to CMA. How did that happen? How did you decide to, you know, initiate this? I would say this offering for composting and all of that. So talk to us a little more about the initiation of CMA.
Yeah, so I springboarded out of Cedar Grove, sort of in the tail end there. Cedar Grove did something really smart, and that's back when the big food waste program started. As you know, Seattle has a lot of big campuses and like Microsoft and the Seattle area and then Amazon and We have large universities in the greater Seattle Tacoma area. So there's many, many places and many of those campuses with lots of desire to do food scraps and food service packaging, compostable. So, and of course, they were the major composter for their area, and they were have years of experience collecting organics, so they had really all the infrastructure needed to really service that at the highest level. So again, just being there when people had the need, but when the packaging started coming in, the only standards really that had traditionally been out there were the ASTM standards. The ASTM standards are the Association of American Society of Testing Methods, and there's specific methods that were developed years ago to help make sure that if you're creating a compostable product, they used to call it biodegradable, but that definition didn't really fit over time because compostable is like a subcategory of biodegradable. And biodegradable, a tree is biodegradable and it could fall down in your yard, but it may not biodegrade right away. It may take 10 years before it all breaks down and turns into part of your soil, right? So they had to have a better definition for the word related to compostable packaging. So that's where it shifted from biodegradable to compostable. And that's where you started to see laws about using the word biodegradable that started in California and then in Washington State. But back to the story of how all this started, because I got off on a tangent. But what happened is these lab standards have various aspects that you have to meet to be considered biodegradable, compostable. And that's like, does it actually biodegrade and break down to biomass and water in nature and not leave fragments of material behind? It has to disintegrate in a certain amount of time or just be visually break down. You have to, they do toxin tests and bioassays to make sure it's safe and you're not going to get anything bad in your yard, that would be a problem. And then over time, we started seeing PFAS out there in materials. So now there's certification requirements that you don't have a certain level of total fluorine or beyond for all the certifiers that do what we do. So you have the lab aspect, but what was happening back then is the disintegration part. When those ASTM lab standards were developed, composting systems were a lot different when they were developed than they are today. Why is that? Because now we're doing post consumer food, we're putting it into compost, and the management of that, you need a higher level of technology, you need different types of permits. You have to manage it differently because now you're adding new pathogens and bacteria that you're not going to have from just your yard waste and your grass clippings. So in certain states, like on the West Coast, we're very regulated out here. There's certain standards for what kind of technology you can have. So what I'm saying is when the lab standards were developed back in the 90s for systems that might be running 6 months long, because they didn't have all this volume going through back then, to today where that the systems or the permitted sites in the old days may be running at 6 months. Well, now they're running at 60 days. So you have a shorter cycle, you have different technology, you have different temperature profiles for different types of processes. So what you have to remember at the end of the day is composters are manufacturers, and all of them use different types of manufacturing processes, and they're not really one size fits all. I mean, they use the general same practices and this general same best management practices, but the processes can vary, and in turn, that can vary in how a compostable product that may be fine in the lab will actually perform when it's received at a composting site. So, what Cedar Grove did is they were finding these materials were not breaking down. So, here you had someone sourcing a product at top dollar back then before the scale brought the prices down. So, sourcing some for 15-20% more, only to have it go to the composter, not break down enough for it not to get screened out at the end and take a really long, expensive ride to the landfill. So Cedar Grove got smart and they started doing their own disintegration testing in their piles just to make sure they were getting products that would actually break down adequately in their system for them to be accepted. So once they found those materials that could meet that criteria, we started publishing a list. I was kind of the list distributor. That was part of my job. I'd reach out to all the cities. Here's the list of Cedar Grove. And it became a really efficient way to connect the composting site to a list of approved products. And so by about 2016, this all started really in about the late like 2009. By 2016, there were so many people like using the Cedar Grove list and asking for the Cedar Grove list. And I had been privileged enough to be elected to the board of directors at the US Composting Council. And I'd met other composters. And I was kind of talking about, I was getting calls from all over the country. And, I was just over in Seattle, and the CEO was really paying me to deal with Seattle. But I said, would you guys be willing to talk about doing this nationally, but working with me on that? And one thing led to another. I ended up visiting them all with a local friend of mine who was also a composter and his family, and we put together an operating agreement. So I really am one of 5 partners in the CMA network, and we field test compostables and also review the ASTM standards. We have the in-house and third-party technical assistance of the top-notch people in the country, and so we were able to do both and really offer a program for composters that really are the receivers of this material. They do have to be considered when we're designing these products. They're the ones that are going to receive them, and you've done a lot of work in recycling and things like that. You know a lot of about that, but just like recycling streams, we need the integrity to be there to really make it a sustainable program for the long run. So I always say CMA was really developed to bring the supply chain and the compost piles together and co-create compost and compostables, because we have to be in business together to really make it work. So that's what we're really trying to inspire, both regionally and nationally, and we're doing a lot of other big initiatives that we've led outside of just our company, and it's exciting times exciting and also very challenging times to be working on all these initiatives that really, really, really affect climate change, our ability to minimize plastic pollution in the environment, our ability to, use our own resources in our own communities for growing good food. And again, climate change is such a part of sequestering carbon is making compost and using it. And, it just doesn't get better than that on all sides of the program.
Yeah, I'm 100% sure there is no dearth of challenges in your life right now. But I'm going to go to, education 101. So there are certain terms, and because you're so deeply enmeshed in this world, it'll be great for the listeners and me to hear from you. So what is the real difference between compostable and biodegradable?
Biodegradable, in my terms, and I'm not going to describe like one of my chemists would, but in basic terms for your audience, biodegradable just means it'll break down eventually into biomass and water. It'll eventually naturally, like a tree or a twig in your yard, it's going to break down into nature eventually. It's going to, respirate CO2, and it's going to break down and eventually just become part of the earth again, which just means it's really going to go back to the earth in real simple form. And so, compostable, when I say compostable, that term was made to be able to define a food service item that had to get through a composting facility in a lot less time than a twig in your yard. That twig in your yard might be out there for a year and a half, but I got to get your cup through my system in 60 days. So you can't just say biodegradable, because that's this big, lofty, oh, it just breaks down in nature. Well, because that material, that input is going into something with a very specific time frame, it has to fit the time frame. And that, I guess you could say that definition was created to help define the time frame. Compostable means it'll break down in a certain time frame, meaning it has to get through an industrial composting site, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I think that defines it well, because I've heard multifarious kind of definitions over the years, and it's about environmentally beneficial and environmentally benign, or obviously
Yeah.
not beneficial. Those, it could be biodegradable, might even be environmentally benign. But I don't know if that's the case. I guess a biodegradable will always be beneficial as well, or do you think it could be either benign or beneficial?
My specialty is really, compostable biodegradables, but I would say that, there was a period of time where there were oxo biodegradables being made. And I'm not a chemist, but those oxo with that prefix were not the same as biodegradable. And so there was a lot of confusion in the market. And then eventually there were laws that said, well, pretty much saying they're not the same. So people weren't defining them the same. So but again, if anything is made of nature and breaks down naturally, and again, you got to remember compostable, they're taking natural things, but that and natural materials to make those compostable items, or bioplastics are made of a number of things. And and they're trying to everything, but he's trying to use the renewable materials like corn for like PLA, and there's other things. But again, I'm not an expert on where all those substrates are derived from. Um, but there's a lot of innovation in those areas of bioplastics and things like that. And I do think bioplastics have a big purpose in the future. And I think there's just a lot of there's a lot to learn about how they could be. I just feel like there's a lot that people just don't know about the benefits. Like if you were using like a biopolymer material for a compostable item, they can change the chemistry a little bit to get it to work eventually. If you have a fiber material, and there's a lot of great fiber materials that work and break down and get certified, but there's certain categories that could be a real challenge. And also a lot of those fiber materials are treated, with something. And so, and they have to meet the ASTM, but at the same time, are some of those treatments, even if they're not toxic or anything, are they inhibiting the microbes from eating it for some reason? So like if you treat something to be hydrophobic and repel water, well, microbes need water to work. So there's all these things we just don't know. And again, I think CMA's kind of in the first place, where the guy that designed the fiber container and the composter that got a master's in composting science actually have conversations now. And I think that's the way the world should work. They're both scientists, but from two different angles. And if they're talking more about what's happening in the pile and what they've got in the material, I think we get a lot further to get all the products right in our system. And I want to give credit. There's a lot of products that get certified that work really well, are well made and from great companies. So we do have a very good list. And there's still categories though that come in, and you know we still need to get some work done on them. So
Yeah, and I think like in a way you need so many different solutions to jive together, and
yeah,
and
there's
I
a
think
lot,
and that's where
exactly.
yeah
And scale's
yeah
tough, because the compostables markets that people want to grow it. So to scale it up, you need scale. You need big buyers. You need legislation that might push more of it, and we also have legislation pushing less of it now. So it's really an interesting time. And if it's okay, I do want to mention, it's very timely because we I won't go into the details on how this all happened, but I'm one of three women that really put together and led this whole system's improving the circularity of compostables and compost initiative, where we went to Denver and we literally brought all parts of the system in the room for 3 days and set a strategic plan for how we're all going to work together, because we need each other to get this thing moving the right direction. And it was an amazing experience. And now we're doing the activation phase. And like anything, we need funding for our wonderful facilitators to get us through the process. And we're starting the steering committee. But I'd be very interested if any of your listeners are interested in getting involved or working with us. We welcome everyone. And we define the system with the supply chain side, the materials folks, the manufacturers, the distributors, the sub distributors, the haulers, the composters, the regulators. We have cities coming. We have the whole gamut being represented in this group, because we really don't feel we can advance together without really strongly representing the whole system. And so that's probably the most timely thing I'm working on now that I get very excited about.
No, absolutely. And of course, I heard about it even from Munir, who we were talking about before, and he was on our podcast. So he was talking about that beautiful initiative that you guys came up with and how
Yeah,
powerful it was and how it moved from day one to day two. And, how people did start collaborating from, anxiety in the beginning. So it was,
amazing process. And I got to give
yeah.
the process a shout out. It's called Future Search. and it's used in a lot of governments all over the world to help them plan and get their large, departments in government, and also private industry use quite a bit there too. And the United Nations uses that method. And wow, I swear by it now. It's an amazing engagement model for large group work. I've never seen anything like. I didn't do it. My friend's the expert at it. I was just a participant, and I enjoyed it immensely and just thought it was an amazing process.
No, it's so important. This work of bringing different components together is so important. I'm going to stay with 101 though right
Okay.
now. So we'll get into deeper stuff. Okay, the difference between home and industrial compostable. It'll be great to hear it from you.
Yeah, so home composting is obviously you're doing it at your house or where you live, and you need a little bit of space for that. So hopefully you have a little spot in your yard for it. And what you're going to do is you're going to collect a certain amount of browns to greens, carbon to nitrogen. So browns would be wood, or in the fall leaves that are brown, or and so you want to usually have 10 to 1 carbon to nitrogen for your mix. So you got to make sure you have good feedstocks. You can take from your kitchen vegetative clippings and things like that, but don't put any dairy or anything like that. You can put like cereal and things like that. That's like plant based anyway, but you want to just limit it to that. No meat. You can put eggshells, but no meat, no dairy, because it just won't break down, and it will also attract vectors. So you don't want to do that either, and you won't get what you need in your pile to really process those types of things well. So you do that, and then if you're living in an area like I'm in Seattle, and we don't usually need to hydrate our piles here because we get lots of rain. But if you're in an area where it's a bit arid, or you need to add some moisture to your pile just to keep it going, those microbes need water to work, and you need to turn your pile periodically. And to learn really about what's the best composting method where you live, or where you live. It's you can look up master composter programs in your community. A lot of times they're county funded and county available, or master gardener programs where they might offer a composting class. But there's classes you can take. I highly recommend you take a little class. Make sure you know how to do it right. But if you do it right, you can produce your own compost from vegetative food scraps in your kitchen, and your yard clippings and your wood clippings. And if you manage your pile well, it gives you a really nice way to top dress your containers, or to get into your garden every year, and really starts breaking up the soil, and giving you that natural nutrients from your own homemade compost. And but it's not a lot of technology. It's mostly labor and time and commitment, and that's really home composting 101.
And of course, we want to get to industrial, but I want to actually button a question here.
Okay.
So we get these days, you get these little devices like Lomi or Renicle or the Mill, and they claim that they are going to create a compost in 24 hours. Do you think that's feasible, or where does your understanding of that?
Well, I think technically they're not claiming it's compost, just because I have knowledge of. I do know the folks at Lomi pretty well. They're great people, and I haven't met people at Mill yet, um, but what they do is they really dehydrate the food and concentrate it. And I actually think it has a great application because I'm working on a little project with those. And here's the area where things like that could really work. Multifamily, apartment complexes. I live in a town where we've got Navy housing across the water. You've got multifamily complexes that don't have service for organic food waste, for food waste. So you can actually use those, and I'm trying to put together a program now where they really concentrate it down so you can put them in the collection area of your apartment complex in a bin, and then they can actually help fill the truck when they're going to the homes, the regular single family homes, and fill in the air spaces and bring in that material that would otherwise go to the landfill because they're throwing it away. If they got a Lomi, they can make it into something that could still go into the compost collection program, and it would kind of help fill the truck. And when the truck gets there, and they bill their customer, they get charged by the ton, so they adds more weight, it makes them a little bit more money. And it's just a great program. So So I would say those are really cool innovations, I think, in taking one more step closer to getting food scraps out. But they wouldn't be the equivalent to home composting or even an industrial composter because they're really just bringing that food and really just, they're dehydrating it down to like sort of like a little soil. And you could also use it yourself. It's high nutrient. You could blend it with soil and use it in your potting soil or whatever, but it does have a purpose, but it would not be the equivalent in my mind to just making compost.
The Good Garbage podcast has been brought to you by Paka. Paka has been creating solutions in the food packaging, carry, and service space. Paka utilizes sugarcane residue and upcycles it into amazing products. Their latest offering is a compostable, flexible packaging solution for the chocolate and confectionery industry. The products are available in the Indian subcontinent and in North America now. Paka is also building an end-to-end solutions for customers in the food service and delivery space. For any query, do email at connect@paka.com, and Paka is Pakka. Now, back to the show. Okay, let's switch to industrial composting. So you were saying about it being like a factory, is what I heard. So
Yeah.
so so talk to us a little more about that, and why is it so important?
Yeah. So there's a reason that I called our company compost manufacturing lines because I it's just to put in the minds of people the composters are manufacturers. So we need to take care in what we send in for them to put into the product that they're making to sell back to you. So if you're sloppy and you put in plastic by mistake or you don't pay attention and throw your pot that you pulled out to put in your perennial garden and it's plastic and I chucked that in the yard bin. Don't do that. Because what happens if you and 500,000 other residents do that on your now they've got a real problem. And now, that material could come back as it gets chipped up in the process of making in the industrial composting world, it can be problematic. So yes, so you have these programs that are primarily contracted through cities or haulers through city contracts for the processing of curbside yard waste and food waste. Food waste growing right now, and these facilities do a fabulous job. I mean, they bring them in there and like I said, they put them in huge grinding systems and they conveyor them out to the areas where they go, or they use loaders, guys on loaders all day, moving all that material around. And again, depending on their composting technology, they process that material and they want to get it back to market. So,
No, super. So two parts. One is, of course, in terms of when we were talking about home composting and industrial composting, what is the reason that like Europe offers this okay home compost and US doesn't? What is the reason for that, and how it's changing? And then taking a jump into CMA, why get into certification at all? So so what is it? What is the big difference that CMA brings in compared to say a BPI,
yeah,
which also does
yeah.
certification? So two parts: first the home, and then the CMA bit.
I mean, personally, home compostable standard would be really hard to enforce. I mean, I think my personal, I love home composting, and I want to see as many people do it as they can because that's even better than shipping it off site. If you can do it at your house, that's top notch, right? So do it at your house if you can. But I think that once you start talking about certifications for packaging that are home compostable, if your neighbor does it one way and you do it another way, and let's say you put the wrong material in, a lot of biopolymers, they need high temperatures to break down. So you see something that's compostable, you put it in the ground or in your yard, is it going to break down, or will it take 3 years, or will it fly over to the neighbor's yard? Now they think you're littering. I mean, I just think there's all these things to think about. I'm not saying we shouldn't have one in the US, but I'm just saying personally, I don't know what that would look like to avoid some of those things. So I do know BPI is working on it though, and I give them a shout out and say I heard that they're working on a home compostable standard, but you're right, it's only been TV so far that I know of, and I think the second one may be BPI in the US. I don't think that's our core competency is working with the large composters with the big facilities. That's what CMA's lane is, and I think that's where we operate best and we have the most knowledge. So
And yeah, that cues me really well to why get into certification at all, and of course the big difference that CMA in its process offers in terms of testing and certification.
yeah, well, I mean, certification is very important. Number one, to what I spoke to earlier, you know, we don't want to like guess that something that might look earthy is not full of plastics or chemicals that you wouldn't want to grow your food in and feed to your kids. Okay, so so we want to make sure it's safe. So all the lab standards and everything that's been developed that has become the framework for certifications, that's what certification's really confirming for you, that it met the standards of safety in how it's, what its constituents are and all the things that, whomever's certification you're using, that it meets those standards and that it truly is compostable, that it truly will biodegrade into nature. And, that's what you want a certification for. So if you didn't have the certifications, it'd be the Wild West. And I don't think composters would survive it, for one. I think everyone would lose the privilege to even try to do packaging if we didn't have certifications. Because it's a risk to the business too. It's a risk to the composter. It's a risk to the cities that go out and push legislation and implementation of these programs. We're mandating organics out of the landfill now. We better do it right. And if those materials are coming in and they're not vetted properly, you know, then we shame on us. So certifications matter for that. Then I would add, and they've been around for a number of years. CMA got into certifications because we just really didn't feel like anybody was taking into account what the composters needed to be certified for. So there's certified it to call it compostable, in my opinion, and that's meeting the lab standards. But then part two is certifying it for the composters. Say, I'm comfortable taking that. I'll take 50,000 cups from the stadium if it passed this test, because he's got to run his business and he's got to be profitable. And if we don't care if the cups break down, or we don't care if the materials are the right materials for his site, that's a private industry in most cases, and that's his business, and he's got to be able to set his own rules as the manufacturer. And I always say this to like folks. I said, if somebody made a PLA cup, a clear bioplastic drinking cup that was compostable, I said, would your customers buy your cup if there were just a little bit of sandy, cloudy stuff in the cup when they drank from it? If it just looked a little dirty, would you be able to sell that cup? It's like, well, no. I go, well, if somebody gets a beautiful load of soil and there's a bunch of materials that didn't break down, bright pink cutlery and green bags that never quite made it, and it'll look like trash to them, and we can't sell our product. So I think everybody has to have empathy for each other, that everybody's trying to, that's why I say let's make compostables and compost together in a model where we're all successful. Because if we do it wrong on either end, it really, the intention of all these great, wonderful, brilliant people gets lost in a broken system. So we just need to work together to put that system into one. And again, you look at our recycling rates now and over the years, and contracts got cheaper, 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 and then out of sight, out of mind, we exported everything, and now we don't have a lot, I mean, it's changing now, but we lost a lot of our domestic recycling production. And so, I mean, we need to keep our program sustainable in our own regions so that we can be sustainable for the long term. And composting's a wonderful model of regional sustainability that is just so hits all the marks when you have a industrial composter in your community. It just, the compost we make doesn't go to the landfill and create methane, so it doesn't add to climate change, and when we take that material and we put it in our gardens, it sequesters carbon. It cleans up it cleans up our environment. It cleans up waterways. If you put compost around a stream bank, it just cleans all the a lot of the chemicals. They get sort of captured in the compost, and the hydrocarbons get eaten by the microbes. It's really amazing stuff. And it helps keep silt from getting into waterways, which is another thing we lose in the inorganic side, the sand and the silt that runs off from construction. I mean, there's so many things compost addresses in our environment. It's endless. And I just sit there and I go, this we want to pass the big federal composting act so we have composting everywhere and can get funding for that. And it would just make such a huge impact if we could do that nationally. So that's a dream of a lot of us veterans.
No, absolutely. And we all become compost in the end.
That's
So,
right. That's true
we better
too.
be
And in
good at
my
it.
state, you could actually choose that to be composted. It's true.
Well, that's
I love
good.
it.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad they do that. That's what I told my children. Just bury me in a
Yeah,
mycelium casket
there
near
you
a
go.
tree so that it.
Turn me into potting soil, then grow a geranium with me, please.
Just a body. It doesn't matter anymore. But okay, so just of course, like all the things that you just said are so important in terms of composting. And the one thing I found fascinating with CMA was this idea of field testing, which is kind of what you were inferring to. But I would like to dig deeper into that. Of course, there are certifications that come from lab testing, and I've seen it world over. Most of it is lab testing, and you put in a very important point to see it from a composter's perspective. So, are you saying that when it's lab tested, it may or may not be kosher?
I'm saying there's one aspect that we're just confirming one aspect of that lab test. Will it disintegrate? So
Aha.
think about a
Okay.
factory and production. It has, in most cases in the facilities we represent, it goes all the way through the process. Then it goes through half inch or 3/8 or depending on the facility or what it's going to be used for. But it can be anywhere from half inch down to a quarter inch sieve. It goes through that, and anything that's bigger than that gets kicked out. So if it didn't break down, it didn't get composted anyway. So you want it to break down adequately so it goes through the process without getting screened out. And even still, there could be particles of materials that didn't break down. So it just adds to the net attractiveness. Is that material still breaking down so it looks like it's plastic or it looks like it's trash? And paper's kind of less problematic operationally because it kind of gets stained with the compost, so it kind of blends in. But if you do have like a compostable fork that might be certified, but it doesn't break down in the piles, and that gets chunked up and ends up in somebody's yard, even though it might be compostable, will it be arrested and never break down anymore? I don't know. It depends on the chemistry. And if it doesn't break down, but someone thinks it's not, they think it's plastic because it looks just like it, then they're going to think it's trash. So there's all these things to consider about that. Plus, if they're pulling it out, they have to landfill it. And in the cities, in the areas of the country where you have a lot of composting that's successful, a lot of it's because they have really high landfill rates. So if you're having to pull out all this stuff that didn't break down and then landfill it, now you're paying more money, the composter is, for something he never got paid for. So I would just segue that into a lot of your EPA, our laws now, your extended producer responsibility laws may be able to address some of that. So,
So, just furthering my education, do you see a big difference in terms of field testing and lab testing?
oh yeah,
So you infer to, is there things that may be kosher in a lab that, yeah, tick mark, certified, industrially compostable, but when you actually take it into the field, like you're saying, there may be particles left, they may not go through the sieve. Is there a lot of that?
yeah. I mean, you gotta labs have methods, so they're highly controlled, like the temperature you do it in, and again, I'm not a chemist, so I
Absolutely,
but
yeah.
just know it's highly controlled. And I think culturally, that's sometimes why there's tension between composters and lab folks, because it's so precise in the lab, or the result is nil. You have to avoid a result if you get the method wrong, or you get the process wrong, or you get the temperature wrong, right? So it's so black and white, it's so curated, and so specific. Well, composting, we got 4 seasons every year. We got pumpkin season, we got tree season, we got, after Christmas, we got the turkey carcasses coming in, and the ham bones. And I mean, you have pretty much, based, just sort of total organic it's all organic material all year, that's for sure. But the feedstocks will vary, and again, however that composter processes will vary from, a little bit from one to the next. And so you have a highly controlled lab and kind of a Wild West sort of manufacturing site. There's people on loaders. The truck breaks down. The grinder over here went out. So they had to move this to this pile, and it's a lot of heavy equipment. It's a lot of, in some cases, conveying. It's a lot of movement of material, and you got to remember you got neighbors, so you don't want to have stuff moving around a lot. So you're creating a lot of odors or anything like that. So you're managing a lot at a composting site, and so it's not a lab. It's very fast. It's furious. I wouldn't say it doesn't follow a methodology or a set of best management practices. It does, and composting sites have permits, and they have operations plan embedded in those permits, and they have to follow their operating plan to follow their permit. So they're gonna they're gonna be very methodical in how they make compost every single day on a schedule with the equipment, the way it's designed, for consistency of product, so that they're in compliance with their permit and their regulators, and so they can move the materials through quickly and efficiently, because tomorrow they're going to bring a whole new set of trucks. So
And I come more from the product side of compostable packaging. So a lot of times I see our scientists come in and say that, oh, it can get certified because it will disintegrate 90%. And I don't understand that. Like, is that kosher from your point of view, that there is still 10% left, but somebody decided that, okay, if it's under 10%, it's okay, it can still be compostable,
yeah.
considered compostable? How does that harm? Or does that work really? Should I say yes, it's okay? Because each time they say that to me, I said no, but what happens to the 10%? Will that create a challenge? So how do you think of that?
Well, again, I think there's biodegradation, which is one part, which it all has to break down to biomass and water. Then there's disintegration, which is really its ability to break apart and just become soil, or in the case of biopolymers, it just doesn't. It's nothing. It doesn't turn into the soil. It doesn't turn into compost really, because it just sort of hydrolyzes, and there's nothing really left. Cutlery and things like that. There's really not a lot of material left. There is with wood and some fiber materials. But again, it's more about operationally. If it leaves behind 40%, that's a lot of a spoon. But no, back to what you said. I think we're all harmonized. I'd say all the labs 90% disintegration, and we are too on biopolymers, but we go 80% on fiber. We do. And the only reason for that is, to my point earlier, even if fiber can break down 80%, it's pretty much in the shape where it's going to look like more like soil. And that's, I mean, it sounds so kind of non-scientific to say that, but it really is an operational thing. We are an operational test for the composter to give him some assurance that if that material comes in large quantities, it will break down, and he's not going to be paying the bill to send it to the landfill. It's that simple. And he shouldn't. He shouldn't be paying the bill to send it. It should work. So that's what we're trying to address.
Interesting. What you mentioned when you were talking about composting and earlier more in detail, It was very interesting to hear you say that different kinds of input materials at different times. And one thing that struck me was lots of turkey stuff coming in during Thanksgiving.
Yep.
So so is it really important that the quality of, and you mentioned this before, so I'm kind of putting these two things together. Is it really important for the composter to produce similar kind of compost through the year? Does that impact? And then how does one manage that? Because I guess the food scraps are higher, lower, there is more meat in it, there is less meat in it, it takes more time. So it's really complex, what you're talking about. And how does one manage something like that?
Well, I mean, they've been doing it for many years, and they've seen an evolution of feedstocks. So what I mean by that, most of them started with just yard waste, right? Just the clippings from your yard, your grass. Okay, they start there, pretty much greens, and a lot of times they'd have so many greens they needed brown, so they'd go out and look for broken pallets and Boeing, like I'm here in Seattle, and they'd have to go out and get their browns because so they have to run to a recipe. So it's not so much about the feedstocks as what's the recipe, my carbon to nitrogen. Do I have a good blend? Do I have enough in my storage for the upcoming grass season? So they end up collecting wood certain parts of the year for the heavy seasons when they don't have the wood because they always have to have the balance of carbon to nitrogen all year long. This time of year, or when you hit late fall, there's a lot of wood. People are trimming the trees, they're starting to do all their pruning, so you get tons of wood in September, October out here. And then we have huge windstorms here, so then you get a lot more wood after all the limbs fly around and the utility, the local public works come out, collect all that, and send it to the composter. So they do have regularity though every year. Like they always work every year. They kind of know what's going to come in and when. And so they're really just looking at carbon and nitrogen. It's more about the science of the recipe. Carbon to nitrogen, you need bulking agents, so you need enough wood to get air spaces into your pile. It's about how much moisture is in the pile. It's good to start at about 60% moisture, 60 to 65, because it's going to volatilize out of the pile over time. So you want it to be high moisture when you start and, settling in at 45, 50 at the end if you can. And so you're going for these best management targets all year round with changing feedstock. So what they have to do is be good at like saying, okay, you know, I'm going to get a high source of carbon from this material over here, so I got to save a little for next week. And they just get good at that because they do it all the time. And you're right, they have to make a consistent product year round. Now keep in mind, most of your compost though is sold. I know this because I was the marketing director for several years, but is sold like from March to June, like the highest percentage. So it's when spring starts. That's when you see this huge surge of compost sales because everybody's putting their gardens in. A lot of contracts are coming out of the winter on the highway and they're starting to get the trucks out again. So you have a huge amount of activity in the spring. That's why don't bug a composter from March through June because he's too busy. He's going to be too busy delivering loads and keeping guys on loaders and trying to fill all his orders because it's just nonstop that time of year.
I just wish they keep busy all the time.
I
That's good for
know.
the planet.
Well, I
but,
think food
but
scrap programs though have helped the inbound, level out
yeah.
more. So having more food in, I remember the years we'd have to lay guys off in the winter because we didn't have the inbound. And so with food scraps now, I haven't seen that happen in the industries that I'm familiar with around here. They haven't had to do that because food scraps have helped with that. So that's helped.
We're probably over an hour down, but I haven't gotten to my critical
Okay.
question, and I will now. So we'll pivot. So of course, the whole idea for us is that how do you create packaging which is more suitable for composting in the end. So how do you see that? What are the challenges that the composters face with materials coming in? Because there is so many different varieties. You infer to biopolymers, you infer to fiber, and like looking at it from, because in the end if it doesn't compost and if the composter is not happy, it's not going to fly on the on the front
Yeah.
end either. So how do you see that?
A lot of challenges that composters have with compostables that you hear probably a lot, but look-alike materials, you know, or something that looks earthy. Just because it looks earthy doesn't mean it's not full of plastic. um, so I think the flip side of the really great work we do and BPI does and TUV does and the certifiers do and folks like you do by bringing awareness with your podcast. I mean, it's just that, it's tough because they are trying to make a product and in various cities in various ways, even sometimes cities in the way the contracts are designed, they're fighting contamination left and right. And I personally believe, this is my personal statement to you, there's so much plastic around food at the grocery store. And that's where a lot of their contamination's coming from through homeowner curbside programs. And everybody's looking over at the, big venue food service folks. And yes, there's mistakes that get made there and fake cutlery gets sold, that, where it's half plastic and they're greenwashing. We know there's those greenwashers. So that's what we're fighting on the commercial dine-in food service side. But what we really need to do is create compostables to help clean up what's coming in from homeowners. And that's the produce bag and the fruit sticker and the band around the banana. And now there's salad bags and salad tubs and there's all this plastic that wasn't there 30 years ago when I was a young mom. I was cooking my meals. I could grab a chicken, a set of 4-pack rolls and two takeout deli salads on my way, home. I mean, we cooked our food and or if we had takeout. But the point being is my own personal campaign is let's look at what's coming in from homeowner to give more of a tolerance to help clean that up so composters have more of a tolerance for welcoming new materials that come in maybe through commercial or grocery retail, because I think there's huge opportunities there. But I think there's other parts of the country, frankly, where I really don't know. I don't know the genesis, but like in California, they're have regulations now that are looking at limiting compostables and how that's going to look, and that's more because of the organic you know standard for certain facilities that the state might want to promote. And there's just a lot going on legislatively right now, which is why this whole systems engagement together is so important, us all working together to find out what is our common vision, because if we don't have one, that's part of the problem. If we're not all envisioning together how we're going to get to where we all want to go together, it's going to be really hard to get a roadmap and be united. So some of the challenges are lookalikes. That's why we have model legislation in my state that I'm happy to say I was part of many years ago, working with the groups that worked on that for color marking produce bags in the grocery store and how you label your materials. So we have a compostable labeling law. Green bags only in compost systems, which I'd say our region is really good at now. You're not seeing anything but green bags out on the market, both commercially and so those are helping the systems improve. I think that regulation, but I think there's just a long way to go on knowledge, than just people understanding what compostables are, which one should I take. And again, CMA makes a composter list. So for some composters, they prefer that. Others are fine with BPI, and we don't dictate. We're like not chasing composters down to say ours instead. It's just more of, we're here for the ones where that makes more sense. And, but at the end of the day, we need the food scraps, and composters know that. And at the end of the day, I think cities, counties, and a lot of consumers want the option of compostables. So I feel like there's tensions coming on the consumer side will push a lot of things people are kind of throwing out, or what they don't want in terms of compostables. I feel like consumers are going to be going the different direction. So I don't know where that's all going to end up, but um, I will say right now for the programs I'm privileged to be part of in many, many large cities, I just think being able to have this certification and the knowledge of the people that built the programs in my back here, my partners. These are the guys that really pioneered the industry and grew it to what it is today. And I just think all that wisdom and knowledge within our working group is, how we kind of figure out where we're going next. And our industry's aging out. We need the younger crowd to come in and have some new ideas that we couldn't figure out everything. So, and I'd love to see technology do more upstream to sort materials so all of us aren't doing it on the back end. I think that's ridiculous. We need to get upstream and figure out. I mean, if you could take a phone and scan a perennial, it'll tell you what it is. Why can't you scan a cup and say, oh, yeah, yeah, that goes to the recycling in this city? Oh, you scan it twice, you know where it goes. Why can't we use technology for that? I have hope for the future in the young people.
I'll take the technology notch a little bit higher. Having bins that start beeping as soon as you put something incorrect in it.
Or
Like
electrocute you. No, I'm just
voila.
kidding. Actually, I was at
Yeah. Okay.
University of Washington. They had literal films. They had video above the bin with exactly the wrapper in it, and it was just amazing. They did an amazing job on their education pieces. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah. Because people have figured this out. As soon as you walk out of a shop without having scanned something, it'll beep, right? So you set up
there you
set up
go.
bins somehow. I was out shopping shopping for my daughter last night, and it was so interesting. This was a store that we went to, and all that person did was the whole scanner was the table, and she just kept putting stuff, and I was like, why is she not scanning? And it was done. I was like, wow,
Wow.
that's really
See,
cool. It's like a pad.
come
And you just
on.
kind of just, as you put the clothes, you fold the clothes and you put it in, it scans. And that's
Wow,
it. It's done. You don't have a tag, you don't have a barcode, whatever the system was.
that is
It
new
was
to me. I
obviously
gotta,
built in with
I gotta go see that somewhere.
it. Okay, I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to ask you a little more on the flip side. What happens is that when we are, as compostable packaging manufacturers, when we are trying to sell a product, everybody wants it to look like plastic. And you kind of mentioned it on the flip side, right? If there's imitation kind of products, and the challenge is that they'll continuously say, okay, if it's a bunch of fiber plates, the consumer wants to be able to see it,
Yeah,
and hence it has to be clear. Now, as soon as it's clear, it looks the same as, it might feel a little different, but it looks the same as a plastic. And that is a huge challenge. So how does one educate the customer, which is the FMCG kind of company, that don't try to make it look like a plastic? And then, of course, like you mentioned before, how do you educate the consumer more so that they are able to segregate? Because that's a huge
it
task, Susan.
is.
It's, I'm sure
It's
you
the
you
hardest
think about it
one.
every day. How do you do the education for both?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. You're asking me a very hard question. um,
Well, I've got you in the house for a reason.
well, I think one of the things, again, that I'd love to see develop over time. On that note, is we don't spend neither end of this spectrum in this industry, whether it's supply side like you and the products that you supply, and like me who represents solid waste system that process and move it, the logistics side of it. I don't think either overall all the industries that we represent, as well as the government, I don't think there's anybody that really specializes in the human behavior and what do the consumers respond to. And I would say this: the compost industry, marketing of the compost industry is all about marketing large volumes of soil. So it's not a consumer driven market from the standpoint of having that internal knowledge of what consumers respond to. I think a lot of the big brands and folks like you and other big brands out there, they have a lot of that consumer knowledge that we could really use to help us, I think, with this solid waste and sorting and human behavior. And I do think technology has to play a role. If I can order a car, on my phone to take me anywhere, and I mean, I'm just amazed at what we're doing with technology, and it just seems like a no-brainer that for all the money we're spending on contamination and you know composters taking it one week and not the next because they got a bad load of beer cups. But then the city called and the rock concert came, so they took them again. And the inconsistency, I think, happens sometimes. We want just it to be stable and everybody like agreed to take it, but agreed to like, but this is how the framework would work if it worked best for all of us. And that's really what we need to do. We need to see, can we all work on technology? Will EPR be the answer? Can they invest upstream? Can we be looking at systems that really aren't so much infrastructure as, again, technology at the consumer level? And I do think, we need some leadership in the big brands. I think they can play a big role too. And we see a lot of that leadership. I'm not saying it's not there now, but I think really getting big brands that are good leaders to help tell the story to their customers. So and in a way that makes them the hero. And I think about my own town here, like the Taco Time story, where they have one bin. One bin. It's compostable only. There's no sorting. They have a durable plate. They have
Wow.
a glass plate or ceramic plate, but their cutlery and their portion cups and all that, their cups, they're all compostable, one bin. And other than the like kids toys that they give out, they have a little tiny, container for that plastic wrapper. But everything else compostable. Let's simplify our programs, man. And
That's amazing.
when you
Yeah.
mix recycling and composting, it all ends up going bad. So don't put if you're gonna do recycling only. If you're gonna do composting only. Don't mix them, separate them. So all compostable makes total sense, and they wouldn't get contaminants because there's no other sorting bin, right? I mean, they'll get the occasional dummy that throws a water bottle in, but other than that, I mean, they're only gonna get the compostable packaging if that's all that's in the place.
That's been like a dream for me, Susan. I've talked about this before, and I just feel like, in the end, if you look at nature and the ecology around us, everything composts.
Yeah,
So why get into this drama? Just have a single bin, make sure everything that we use is compostable, and put it in there
yeah,
and call it good. Like it'll all compost in the end.
yeah.
So exactly what you say, then there are lesser chances of contaminants and drama of segregation, etc., etc. I'm going to take a quick pivot, looking at our time as
Yeah.
well. um, there is the whole side, like you said in the beginning, that it's ultimately a business. So there is this whole side of market for compost, and I feel that if that grows, then the demand for compostables grow. So how do you guys enhance that? Because of course now it gets into complications like land use and how we are pumping fertilizers and all of that. So how is that being worked on? And that kind of correlates to the side of regulations and policy, not just on the side of using compostables, but also on the land use change. Do you guys get involved there, and does that impact composters? How do you see that in
You're
terms of
talking
market?
about compost market specifically
Yep,
growing?
yep. Selling more compost. So if you have more thought on not doing what we've been doing in terms of industrial farming, and putting more compost into the soil, then there will be an automatic pull all around. So how do you guys see that, and does CMA get involved on that side of the regulation as well?
But yeah, so as we make more compost, we need more homes for it, right? So yeah, the market development is critical. And so some of the ways that is addressed now is in policies where even cities and counties, they have projects where they might order soil over here and not the recycled compost. So they're trying to push policies to buy back. If the city's promoting composting, they should buy it back. And then I think that, also specking it, putting it in bids, a lot of your big projects like highway jobs, specking in made from recycled food scrap compost in the bid. So they're only buying compost for a lot of jobs that use a lot of volume. So I those are ways that we're pushing it. But also what I love about the supply chain side of the marketers of compostable materials, they have a lot of knowledge too about marketing things. So I would love to see more of us get together to hear from you guys about, like, give us your ideas. We figured out all these markets, but we're really just composters. I think there's other ways we could cross market compost in your industry that would be really kind of compelling. And uh, marketing compost takes knowledge of certain industries and markets and what makes them buy. And I do a whole course on that every year for Washington Organics Recycling Council. But it's an important question and a smart question because you're absolutely right. And if that there is more compost out there, I think you've got regenerative ag is growing. So it needs, like you said, it needs compost. So that would be a great market demand if we could get that to happen, in more of our farming communities. And but compost really has endless uses. You just have to it's really getting the education out so people understand all the uses, so they would say, why would I not buy that? The other thing I'll say, a lot of people dress their yards with bark. Why do you use bark? Use compost. That whole bark market could be completely replaced by compost. So, and it's going to feed your plant, and the sun's not going to fade it out over time. Now, you might have to pick a few more weeds because it's so good, everything loves to grow in it. But you put a little, compostable, mulch film down there. I actually been working with a company that sells that now. It's really great. I use it myself. And you put compost on top and quit using bark. Use compost. We'd sell all the compost we had if that happened.
Super. So you have some really interesting programs, like one with CTAC, one with Denver. Tell us more about that, and how you're looking at changes coming in, because these are large sites for usage of compostables. How did they come about, and how do they help in the journey that you are on?
Yeah, well, I mean, it started with the partners that I told you about. And, I guess serendipitously over time, one of my partners ended up growing into Denali, which is the largest privately owned network of compost facilities in the country. So luckily, my one of my partners was in an acquisition mode, and so we grew a lot because of that, which was helpful. So I would just say that, yeah, my partners have large facilities. We're kind of the big guys, with the big facilities. We're talking 100,000, 200, 400,000 tons, in some cases a year. And like Cedar Grove does about 300, 350. And so they're not small facilities, or they have multiple facilities. Like St. Louis Composting has 12, three of which accept compostables and food scraps. And so it's just really a strategic map of folks willing to take compostable through the CMA program because that's what they want in order to take them. So again, I think we really create a lane to grow the market for you, but we also really count on folks like you to do what you're doing right now, which is give us a voice so we can help educate on some of the challenges that we could work on together. And that's legislation to minimize the lookalike issue we have and maximize food diversion, and also a willingness to work on strategic plans to take contamination out of grocery retail so that there's less pressure for them to say no, to other things. And but I think we have a lot of work to do, but I think we have so many smart, innovative, committed, passionate people in all the spaces that surround this, that we have to try. And I feel like we do try every single day. You're doing this podcast is trying, and so I think there's a lot of us really committed to excellence in this space. And I just want to keep working on harmonizing everything so we're not going a lot of different directions. And I do feel proud that CMA sort of created this hub of engagement through our large network. But I'll be honest, our guys that own these facilities, they're busy making compost. And so we really, are their representatives in this space, and, really love to bring folks like you in to help us help them, if you will. So it's awesome that you are so committed to that. We appreciate it.
No, we are all in.
I know you are, and
we,
we
we we
appreciate that.
need we need evangelists like you to kind of guide us. So we are all in. We are all excited. But just on and while we are speaking on regulation and policy, of course that plays a huge role. So how much of your effort as CMA and as Susan goes on that side? Because that one change in policy can bring a huge dramatic shift overall. So
Yeah,
how much do you spend time? And I also see a lot of and there's a huge difference in a way, the way EU looks at it, the way US looks at it. I'm seeing EU getting into a lot more complex molecular side of ideas. Like those are like, if it's a biopolymer and it's a certain chain, whether it comes from, it's really complex. And I'm like, okay, how do I get my head around
I
this
know.
now? And cellulose is okay, but PLA and PHA is not okay. So of course, but we won't go down that rabbit hole. I want to understand from you more on the side of your involvement with policy and how you're seeing that change in order to get a voice for the composters and the compostables, and I'm sure that'll make a big impact.
Yeah, well, I think my best experience is I actually got to watch legislation develop over a lot of years into our state policy. So I would say not so much currently, but I was fortunate to remember the day that there was someone from a municipality that came to visit me at the composting site, and I was saying, "Look at all the green film in our pile." City official, and he's like, "Okay." And we went over, we pulled it out, and I said, "What do you think this is?" And he said, "That's a produce bag." And I said, "And you know what the problem is? It's plastic." And he goes, "Oh." And that was the beginning of the Washington state legislation. He said, "I'm going to go back to the city that I work for, and I'm going to write legislation to make sure those bags can't be green." I said, "Do it." And then we got all the bags in the state turned green, and then from there, the state, they did the city of the city of Seattle had a styrofoam ban, and then that grew to a bag ban. So I would say, in terms of my experience with legislation, I've seen legislation that's considered the model legislation from the first day it started to where it ended up, which was it's statewide now. So it's the color marking and the bag bans and all that in concert to minimize contamination, maximize food scrap diversion, and try and address the lookalike problem as well as greenwashing. And I think when you layer extended producer responsibility legislation that's coming down the pike, and like you're looking at Colorado now, a lot of your extended producer responsibility legislation that certain states are proposing now don't have compostables in the legislation. So we have to make sure that if an EPR is coming to any state, even if composting isn't there, we need to leave room for compostables, because that's really kind of circularity around investing in solutions to some of these problems that we're talking about. So I think good market legislation, designing EPR in a way that makes sense for everybody to work together, and really having the facts about compostables, what does work, what doesn't work, and really having good resources for programs where it does bring in a lot of food scraps, like at universities and things like that. I just think there's so many resources to be developed or to be sourced, um, on the best systems for doing all of this all the way around, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes all the sense, and I think your idea of bringing everybody on the table is so important and powerful as well. Okay, I'm going to go over the hump towards closure because
Okay.
our
Yeah.
conversation will never end otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I see that you're battling your your health to be
My
able
runny
to
nose.
be with us. Yeah. Okay, so what are the 5 big changes that you like to see in the next 5 years?
How many changes?
Five.
Oh, five. Gosh. Well, I told you one already. I would love to see everything in the produce department compostable. And even if it's not marked compostable, that's a whole other series, but just to do the least harm to composters. We could convert all of that produce department plastic to compostable plastic. At least that little part of the grocery retail will do a lot less harm and put a lot less pressure on composters to say no, because they'd see an improvement. That would be biggie number one. I'd love to see harmonized regulations so we could build more infrastructure. So composting was the norm in every major city and even in rural areas. but that's going to take all of us pushing for that legislation. And even with the new administration, I think, they there's changes there with, hiring someone with a lot of knowledge in regenerative ag. Composting is a job creator. It's a whole solid waste system program that could create jobs and infrastructure. And, so a composting act, that's number three, would be have a federal composting act so we could grow our market and fill in those composting deserts. So we got lots of markets and lots of programs that we can grow all of these wonderful things that we're doing together. I would say, um, really looking at convenience food packaging. Again, if food's in it, why aren't we designing all of that to be compostable? Your snack packs, your deli containers, because there's food in those. Like, if I always make this joke, and maybe it's an old one, but if on the 5th of July in the U.S. they could just make the potato salad tub compostable, we would have so much food scrap recycling that day, because so many tubs of potato salad sit outside in the sun and they get chucked at the end of the 4th of July party. So why don't we make that compostable? Yeah, so make things that are a problem in the piles compostable with food in them. And what's the last one? And then get an app. I guess that's number 5. Can we build an app that would allow sorting to take away all these problems at the consumer and commercial buyer level, so we don't even have to worry about the rest of this stuff? If we could make that app and it would magically help us sort everything perfectly, all would be utopia.
I love these ideas. Thank you so much. I know it was a quick one and I put you on the
You
spot.
did it. I'm an old
But
gal.
even
Like, my
fine.
RPMs are a little slow, so
But thank you for that.
okay.
Okay, what is good garbage to you? And I'm so excited to hear this one from you,
What is good garbage to me? Garbage that was headed to the landfill but got diverted into something much better.
which is compost. Yay!
Compost, which is compost. I thought that I would just leave that a mystery at the end, but duh.
Much better. What else could be better? Susan, thank you so much. I
Thank
know
you,
you're
Ben.
not so well, but thank you for taking the time to talk to us and share all your experiences with us and where you're heading, which is so powerful. The one takeaway for me that is so important, and I've been talking about this to numerous people in the industry, is your idea of integration. Somebody needs to come in, and I think you're already in, so that's great for us. Somebody needs to come in and talk to everybody on all sides of the table, like the producers, the segregators, the composters, the users of the compost, and all
Right.
of that. And thank you for doing that. I think that's going to bring a revolution, and more power to you to be able to do that. And we are with you all the way.
Thank
But thank you
you.
so much for taking the time, for the work you're doing. And I look forward to more and more interaction with you and supporting you in every which way.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much
You
for
as well. And you're a wonderful interviewer. Thank you. It was very easy and comfortable, and I want to thank you for that as well.
Thank you for listening to the Good Garbage Podcast. Follow us on social media to never miss an episode. Links are in the description below. I'm your host, Ved Krishna. See you next time.